time, I hope, will permit that. And the request is, if you have a question, please write it down and pass it to me. I will then ask the questions from the microphone and address them to the appropriate panelist. And we may need to interrupt the order of presentations a little bit for our distinguished members of Congress whose time is very limited and very valuable. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce Co-Chairman Representative David Valadao from California, who will begin the remarks.
Thank you. Hi, Chairman. How are you? Nice to see you. Hello. Well, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to say hello and thank you all for being here. As you guys all well know, there's a lot of really important topics need to be discussed. The recent assassination attempt of a Sikh American on U.S. soil is extremely troubling. What we've seen going on around the world is something that we obviously need to pay close attention to and speak out and learn as much as we possibly can about. The United States was founded on the principles of freedom. One of the most important is the freedom of religion. It's critical that leaders in Congress and every level of government condemn transnational repression and work towards solutions. I think it's important that we work together on this. And as co-chair of the Sikh caucus, I'll continue working to protect the civil rights of all Sikh citizens and religious minorities. And so I'm proud to have been a part of helping set this up. But I also want to introduce and thank my colleague, my co-chair, who is also in a very tight schedule today, Mary J. Scanlon from Pennsylvania. Thank you very much for being here. Mike is yours.
Sure. Just tripping over things. You're too tall, David. Thank you. I'm really grateful to be here with our friends who have been so vital in my home community as well as here on the Hill in making sure that we're paying specific attention to the issues affecting our Sikh community, both at home and abroad. As was mentioned, transnational repression, whether here in Canada or elsewhere, is something we are very concerned about. We have requested a briefing from the White House, and we will continue to pursue that. We know how important it is. We were just discussing some of the issues with respect to farmers' protests, again, becoming an issue. And obviously, the U.S. was founded upon principles of people being able to petition their government, of civil rights, of human rights. So we will look forward to continuing to work with you to promote that around the world, but particularly here at home. So we are very, very grateful for the political engagement of our Sikh community, because if you aren't telling us what's going on, sometimes we don't always know. There's so much going on. As Congressman Valadao said, there's a lot going on just here on the Hill in Congress, and it's important that we hear from our constituents so that we can do a good job of representing you. So very, very happy that you're here today. Wish I could spend more time, but we just got notice of something else we have to do. So I know you have an amazing panel set up, and I hope you have a great discussion here, and I know you will let us know what the conclusions are and what the results are. So very good to meet all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, it's a distinct honor for me to introduce United Nations Under-Secretary General Elise Ndrito, who is the Special Advisor to the Secretary General on the prevention of genocide. She has a distinguished career in supporting human rights, mediation of conflicts, and is a widely published scholar focusing on solving violent ethnic, racial, and religious conflicts. Madam Secretary General, please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, distinguished members of the House of Representatives, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm really honored to address you today on this very important topic on transnational repression. As the United Nations Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, I'm mandated to monitor situations globally and act as an early warning mechanism to the United Nations Secretary General, and through him, the Security Council, on situations where there's a risk of genocide and other serious international crimes, by which I mean war crimes and crimes against humanity. So my office is also mandated. Oh, it's not on?
I think it is. Can you hear her?
Can you hear me?
All of you? Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she's fine.
Okay. So my office is also mandated to support initiatives through capacity building and technical assistance to governments, regional organizations, civil society, and entities within the United Nations system on the prevention of genocide and related crimes. Genocide is among the most serious international crimes that exist. It was codified in international law through the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, the Genocide Convention, which was adopted in response to the horrors the world had just witnessed in the Holocaust. So please allow me to just give you a brief on genocide. Genocide is not a crime that happens overnight. Situations where genocides have occurred show us that the commission of a crime is the last stage in a process. Genocide takes time, planning, and resources, and it's often the end point of years of discrimination, dehumanization, and smaller-scale violence against a group on the basis of identity, namely based on religion, race, ethnicity, or nationality. It can happen within the borders of a country, or can be the result of dynamics of a transnational nature. It can spill over into other countries or regions, or be the result of the spillover of tensions or conflict in neighboring countries or regions. So, ladies and gentlemen, I must say that genocides are preventable, but prevention requires us to understand and act when we see the early warning signs and risk factors for this crime. When we fail to do so, or where risks are actively exacerbated, the possibility of an escalation that could lead to the commission of genocide will remain. So as the UN Under-Secretary General mandated with raising alarm over situations where there is a risk of genocide and related crimes, I have made identifying these early warning signs a priority. To carry out this work, my office developed a document called the Framework of Analysis for Atrocity Crimes. And this tool is the main instrument in the methodology we use at the office to identify situations at risk. It is also the tool we use when supporting other actors, including governments, regional organizations, and civil society actors to carry out their own risk assessment and to mitigate such risk. The framework identifies 14 risk factors and corresponding indicators. It was developed based on the experience of my office, extensive consultation with experts and practitioners, as well as research into past instances where genocide, war crimes, or crimes against humanity have been committed. So among the risk factors and indicators identified in the framework, we find patterns of discrimination or violence against groups based on religion, race, ethnicity, or nationality, acts of incitement or hate speech against such groups, the denial of the existence of such a group or of past serious violations committed against them, as well as attacks on religious symbols and property. These are just a few and are closely linked to fundamental rights, such as the right to freedom of religion, of belief, and of non-discrimination protected under international human rights law. Hate and dehumanizing language has been a precursor to all genocides, from the Holocaust to the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda in 1994 and the Srebrenica genocide against Bosniak Muslims in Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1995. So the primary duty to prevent genocide lies with the states. Nevertheless, we live in an increasingly interconnected world where new technologies and social media enable us to connect and share experiences globally. It also allows us to understand and engage directly with communities in ways that was not possible before. This provides new avenues for dialogue and understanding cutting across boundaries. But the positive impact of new technologies has come hand in hand with serious negative consequences as well. And if the positive elements of technology bring benefits that are transnational, the negative elements can have transnational impact too. Indeed, hate speech and incitement to violence can now spread faster and to a much bigger audience than ever before. Such hate is not confined to any border, and its implications can be far-reaching. We see every day the regional and even global implications that this has. For example, hate speech based on lies and distortion of facts can spread and vilify an entire community, resulting in hate crimes or violence in real life. Often, such hate and violence transcends borders and even the regions where it originated. So minorities have been disproportionately targeted by hate speech and harmful narratives on social media. And this thread has been highlighted in the past by the then UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, Fernand de Varnes, who issued a report in 2021, noting that the overwhelming majority of cases of hate speech in social media involve minorities as victims and targets. So in a recent report to the Human Rights Council on the impact of new technologies on the prevention of genocide, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, noted the many positive aspects of new technologies that can be harnessed for prevention. But he also highlighted some of the negative challenges. And in this context, the report notes that digital technologies open avenues to new forms of human rights violations, which could pose a risk to the prevention of genocide, including the right to freedom of expression being curtailed by internet shutdowns or by imposing undue limitations on online conversations. Indeed, while these measures can help prevent incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence, or events to genocide from being disseminated, they can also silence protected speech under international human rights law and all the voices of those who can contribute to preventing violence and fostering peaceful, inclusive, and just societies. In addition, those who use the internet to promote prevention of genocide and raise awareness to situations of risk can themselves become targets of attacks and may face unlawful surveillance and attacks on social media, including defamation, intimidation, and death threats. This is especially the case for actors in civil society. So, ladies and gentlemen, as the UN system-wide focal point on countering and addressing hate speech, my office also coordinates the implementation of the UN strategy and plan of action for hate speech, which was launched by the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, in 2019. We have made countering and addressing hate speech, in particular online, a key priority across the UN system and a means of supporting prevention efforts more broadly. By addressing hate speech, we contribute to build and strengthen societies that are based on inclusion and non-discrimination, where diversity is seen as a strength, not a weakness. Addressing hate speech also allows us to mitigate tensions that may otherwise escalate into violence and, in the most serious cases, genocide. So we all have a role to play in countering hate speech. Leaders, including political, religious, traditional, and community leaders, have an important role. Indeed, due to their influence on large groups of people, they are listened to when they speak out to reject hate and promote peace. In tackling hate speech, it's also especially important that we give voice to the victims and to those most marginalized and affected by such narratives. And much more needs to be done to address online hate speech. With this in mind, in July last year, my office launched Countering and Addressing Hate Speech, a guide for policymakers and practitioners targeted specifically at states and tech and social media companies on the implications of hate speech, the implications that hate speech has in the real world, including offline harm, and providing specific recommendations on tackling online hate speech. So the guidance is based on over 3 years of consultations organized by my office with tech and social media companies, experts, and civil society organizations on this topic. It acknowledges that social media has amplified in an unparalleled way the spread and use of hate speech online, and the responsibilities of social media companies to do more to address these challenges, as well as the role of states in holding them accountable through effective regulations. But it also stresses that online hate speech is not separate from offline hate. In fact, in most instances, online hate speech is simply a mirror of the divisions, tensions, and discrimination that exist in our societies. Addressing the risk posed by online hate and new technologies therefore needs to go hand in hand with addressing the root causes and impact of hate within our societies. As we are increasingly interconnected, there is also the increasing risk of transnational incidents being triggered and amplified by hate speech, affecting, for example, individuals in the diaspora advocating for groups at risk in their home countries. We've been following with great concern reported cases of transnational repression, including in North America. Considering such incidents, it is important to remember that human rights, including the right to freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief, are universal and indivisible rights that should be upheld everywhere without exception. Ultimately, human rights reinforces our innate right to feel protected and safe at all times, irrespective of any circumstance, and strongly contribute to preventing genocide and related crimes. It is crucial, therefore, that instances of transnational repression are fully investigated and that perpetrators are held accountable in line with international human rights law. It's also important that we use the mechanisms at our disposal within the United Nations system, including the human rights treaty bodies and the Universal Periodic Review, to give attention to such instances and to ensure that those who are speaking out to highlight situations or communities at risk can do so free from fear of retaliation or threats. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like to proceed?
Well, I'm just seeing if Lark is coming.
All right, we're having a brief pause while we're expecting our next guest, but we'll try to keep the pause brief.
Yeah, just a pause, and if she doesn't come,
Our next speaker is Dr. Iqbal Chima, and he is the director of the Institute for Leadership and Community Development and a fellow of the Edward Cadbury Center at the University of Birmingham in the UK. He holds a PhD from the University of Gloucestershire, and he has written on the subject of constitutional and legal challenges faced by minorities in India. He has been a speaker here at the U.S. Congress on numerous occasions and received many honors for that. And without further ado, please welcome Dr. Chima.
Honorable Undersecretary General, members of the Congress, staffers, ladies and gentlemen, friends. It's afternoon now, good afternoon. And since we have a lot of Sikh friends, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. It's an honor to be on this podium. As Lawrence was saying, I've been on this podium so many times. But I'm very passionate to deliver a panel today, specifically for the reason that I stand here not only somebody who knows this subject, but also a victim of transnational repression. And this term, transnational repression, was missing when I was the victim, because my colleagues from USERF are here. In 2017, United States Commission on International Religious Freedom published my report, Constitutional and Legal Challenges Faced by Religious Minorities in India. So this was a report of its own type, first ever report exclusively on India. And then I didn't know at that time that what was the appropriate term, everything which constitutes transnational repression. So whether that was harassing me, whether using the online space, whether sending me text messages on the Facebook that you would be assassinated, whether that's starting disinformation campaign. My colleagues from the UN, because I was with them at that time as well, they received several letters at the UN structure calling me terrorist sympathizer and all sorts. So today I stand here on this podium, not as somebody who knows the subject, but somebody who is a victim of transnational repression. So when we talk about transnational repression, many of us just think that transnational repression is probably the kidnap attempt or assassination attempts. These are some of the forms we have seen recently. But I think transnational repression is much more than that when we talk about it. It's also stalking people, hacking, physical assaults, attempted kidnapping. As Undersecretary General said, like genocide doesn't start at the final stage with the gas chambers. Transnational repression also doesn't start just with the killings and kidnapping. And it's also about threatening people, detaining them and their family members back home, and also freezing assets, online disinformation campaigns. So most of you who are sitting here today has faced all of that, haven't you? Your families were persecuted back home, your assets were seized. When you visited the country of your origin, there were false cases of sedition against you. So more or less everyone sitting here is very much familiar what transnational repression is. But it's probably a new term. Many of us haven't heard about it, but nevertheless we faced it in the past, and it had many forms in the past. So we know why these governments who does it is usually try to curtail people's voice. Political and human rights activists, people who are journalists, people who are political activists, religious and ethnic minority groups, they are usually the victim of transnational repression. My colleague from Freedom House, we are very happy she has joined us. Freedom House has done some exceptionally good work on monitoring transnational repression across the globe. I think your 2023 report is not available yet, but I was consulting your 2014 to 2022 report, where you have monitored transnational repression. There, as far as my research goes, 854 cases, which constitute all sorts of transnational repression of assaults, kidnapping, assassinations, and all of that. And these cases are not curtailed to one particular nation. This trend is across the nations. But you would be interested to know who are top 5 in this Hall of Shame. So those top 5 countries in the Hall of Shame are China, Turkey, Tajikistan, Egypt, and Russia. While some of the Central Asian countries like Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Iran, Belarus, and Rwanda, they are in the top 10 in this Hall of Shame, I would say. And we must commend the work of Freedom House for monitoring this and consistently looking at it. When we talk about transnational repression, many of you would have remembered, it's a very old problem. In 1976, when I wasn't actually born, there was a famous attack here of Marcos Orlando in DC, where he was assassinated on the US soil at the US Capitol. And obviously, many of you, it would still be in your memory, the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi by Saudi Arabia in Istanbul. So it is not something new. But it is obviously it is now coming in the limelight. When we talk about transnational repression, my colleague from Freedom House would be talking about Russia. Today I would like to curtail my presentation to 2 countries, which is China and India. So that will be my focus. As we are aware that Chinese transnational repression has been a cause of concern for the international structure for years. Specifically in this House, there are pieces of legislation which specifically dealt with Chinese transnational repression. We had congressional briefings in 2016, 2017 as well, when we were flagging up the issues of Uyghur Muslims in China. They are one of the most persecuted religious community or minority in China, and China has been using all sorts of transnational repression against them. There are 1.6 million Uyghurs who reside outside China, and surveillance, infiltration, intimidation, harassment, extradition, you name a form of transnational repression, Chinese government and Communist Party has terrorized this Uyghur Muslim community throughout. And it is really sad to know that it is not only the Chinese soil where these transnational activities are happening. If you look at the neighboring countries of China, like Laos, Cambodia, a lot of activities of transnational Chinese repression has happened there. Journalists, human rights activists, everyone has been targeted in these neighboring countries. Now, Obviously, that is a cause of concern, and we are very happy that we had several congressional briefings and committee hearings here at the Hill. But one of the worrying trend, we welcome our congressman, is this, that some of your former colleagues, sir, are now facilitating Chinese transnational repression on the US soil by lobbying for them, and also some of the former members of Congress has been part of the Chinese effort in the transnational repression, which needs to be curtailed. Sorry, upon your arrival, I have made a very bold statement, but that is the situation today. When it comes to India's transnational repression, India has always been committing atrocities against humanity, or has always been violating human rights and religious freedom. It is nothing new. My colleagues from USERF, they are aware that they have been flagging India up as a country of particular concern for religious freedom. So there is nothing new when it comes to India's transnational repression. But I think more of it has just come to limelight after the statement made by the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in November last year, where he stood in the Houses of Parliament and accused India for an assassination attempt of Mr. Nijjar, a Sikh Canadian who was assassinated in Surrey. I know the gentleman personally. I happened to meet him. He was such a peaceful human rights activist, but obviously he was assassinated. That created diplomatic chaos between India and Canada. And then obviously we know the indictments of certain Indian officials here at the US soil, where there were accusations of transnational repression or assassination plots. Some of people in this room has been formally warned by FBI that they probably can be victims of transnational violence, and they are sitting in this room. So India's transnational repression is not new, and it is not only curtailed to the Sikh community. Anybody who talks about human rights or religious freedom, they have faced it. As many of you would remember, that last year when Mr. Modi visited United States, he was asked a question by a Wall Street Journal journalist, Seema. So we have seen an online hate campaign against Seema, and also a campaign targeting Wall Street Journal, boycotting it and all sorts. And in 2020, Brussels-based, obviously in the Europe-based NGO, discovered many fake media websites and a lot of content which was being produced to promote fake news, and all that was based in Delhi. Also, we are aware that, Madam Under-Secretary General, you should note that India does not completely adhere to UN Convention on Genocide. It has submitted reservations against it. It does not endorse right to self-determination, which is enshrined in the UN Charter, and discrimination against women. And these are only few what India doesn't accept. It's very heartening to see that US is taking these matters very serious, and more attention is being paid to it. We would request the Congress that all the legislation and all the gaps within the current legislation to curtail the transnational repression should be looked at, and legislation should be passed to control the transnational repression. And also, obviously there is an advisory body and monitoring body here, which is very heartening. But I think one of the things which needs to see is that entities which are linked to these authoritarian regimes elsewhere, and who are funded by them, that funding stream by any governments abroad who are authoritarian government should be watched very carefully. We would also like to request that USERF has consistently been flagging up certain countries as country of particular concern. But I think when it comes to the commercial relationship, human rights agenda and religious freedom is sometimes snubbed. So human rights and religious freedom should come first, then the commercial rights and all of that. And in all commercial dealings or contracts with any of the countries, human rights and religious freedom should be used as risk assessment mechanism. And we would request from the United Nations today formally, which I have done personally on many occasions, that here the legislatures of California, the legislature of Pennsylvania, the legislature of New Jersey, and Texas has declared anti-Sikh violence of 1984 to 1995 as Sikh genocide. We would like that recognition in some way or form within the United Nations structures. I could have said a lot, but since we have honorable congressmen here, I would curtail my remarks here, and if there will be any question, we'll be happy to respond at the end of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chima. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the Honorable Donald Norcross, member of Congress from the 1st District of my home state of New Jersey. He has been a member of the House since 2014 and began his career as an electrician and became a later labor union leader. It's quite an interesting background, and we're delighted to have him here. Congressman Norcross.
Slide by here. Good afternoon. I just, before I start any of my remarks, I heard the comments about former congressmen. We have some really good former congressmen. So there is a distinction. In this case, we got the good one on our side. So certainly we understand your concern, but there is a difference. And we have a great one. And to my friends from South Jersey, Harjinder Singh and family, it's great. I come down the hall and I see the smiles, and it's wonderful. And and it's great to be back with you once again. It was, September. We're here in Washington. We made history together. Each day that we begin, the chaplain or a guest chaplain comes before the House with an opening prayer. Religions across the board. There happened to be a mission of one, and we've settled that when we came together and we sponsored a Sikh guest chaplain, head grantee Jaswinder Singh, who went up there, and it was a moment. First of all, let me back up a little bit. I know Pat Meehan, when he was serving, we were trying to do it. We had no idea that this hadn't happened. So it righted an omission. But more importantly, it spoke from the position that a country that was founded on religious freedoms needs to include everyone. And it was a wonderful day. And again, I thank my friends from South Jersey for bringing it to our attention, and Pat Meehan, who was there all along with us. He started it as a member and he finished it as an ex-member who did the right thing. But lots of things going on in the world, and I know I'm speaking to so many who understand this, whether what is going on today with the farmers and some of those horrific transgressions that are going on, and we're aware and monitoring that, to what happened in Canada, to what happened here in our backyard. And quite frankly, I am somewhat disappointed that it has not risen to the level I believe it should be in scrutiny and making sure that people are held accountable. The idea that there is danger, there is criminal behavior going on, unfortunately, is nothing new in this country. The fact that it could have been perpetrated by another government who is supposed to have excellent relations in this country is something very different. And Canada spoke very forcefully when it happened up there, and I think we should also. But where this all started is that we all call America our home, and I think that is what important when I look out here today, that we all come together, whether it was a prayer in the Congress, in the House of Representatives, or if it's back home when we all come together. That is, quite frankly, the strength of our country. Out of many comes one. And I just want to thank everybody for coming here together, being invited to speak here. And we have our whip, Catherine Clark, who certainly understands us and speaks for us all the time about coming together as one and having a conversation. So thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Norcross. It's now my honor to introduce the Minority Whip of the U.S. House of Representatives, the Honorable Kathleen Clark, representing the 5th District of Massachusetts since, I believe, 2013. And we're very pleased to have you here. Everyone's on a tight schedule, so I'm keeping introductions to a minimum. Representative Clark.
Who doesn't know her?
Thank you. Good to see you. Good afternoon. Thank you. What a privilege to be with you. And I want to thank the American Sikh Caucus Committee for the opportunity to be here. And to my colleagues, Mary Gay Scanlon and David Valadeo, who have created this vital space for bipartisan discussion. And to our distinguished guests, lending your time and expertise today, we are very grateful. And it really is a privilege to be able to be here for a conversation that gets at the heart of our shared American values, the freedom to worship without fear. The First Amendment is first for a reason. There is nothing so essential to our democracy and our humanity as the ideas and beliefs that we hold dear. For anyone to dictate which belief system is valid is to kick away the entire foundation that a free society is built upon. As the trailblazing Congressman Sands said, there's no room in the United States of America for second-class citizenship. And I would add, there is no room in the world for second-class humanhood. And yet now, more than ever, the forces of religious oppression have the ability to reach across borders, to impose global fear and global violence on those who happen to pray differently. The Sikh communities face a terrifying and urgent danger, including those here on American soil. This campaign of transnational repression should alarm every single one of us, because both life and liberty are on the line. So I thank you all for shining a light on what is happening. I am eager to draw on your insights and hear your recommendations on how Congress can take action. And know that you can count on me and the House Democrats as your partners in this work ahead, because we know that a threat to anyone's freedom, a threat to your freedom, is a threat to everyone's freedom. Thank you again for having me and for bringing us together.
Thank you.
Imagine if she were here. Appreciate it.
Do you have anything you'd like to say? Very good. Thank you. Our next speaker is Katie LaRocque from Freedom House, where she is the Deputy Director for Policy and Advocacy, served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine, and has a great deal of expertise in that part of the world. And her interest is in combating transnational repression, the release of political prisoners, tactics to defend human rights defenders, to support them, and please allow Ms. LaRocque to join us.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's quite humbling to come after the Minority Whip. I'd like to acknowledge Madam Undersecretary General. Thank you for being with us. Current members and I suppose a former member, thank you for being here. My name is Katie LaRocque, as Lawrence said. Freedom House is an international human rights organization. We have been looking very closely at the issue of transnational repression now since 2014. We stand in solidarity with human rights defenders, diaspora communities, those that are being targeted for being outspoken or perhaps just disagreeing with their governments back home. And we First and foremost, before I even read my remarks, I just want to say that we are with you in this, and we're doing all that we can to elevate this issue. First and foremost, I'd like to begin by just defining transnational repression as Freedom House has defined it. We define transnational repression as when states reach across borders to silence dissent from activists, journalists, and others living in exile. So you don't have to be a famous political opposition leader. You could just be in a diaspora community and be targeted. Perpetrator states do this using intimidation and violence. The goal that they have is quite explicitly to silence you. This issue presents a direct threat to rights and security. It's a values issue and a national security issue, and it takes place in the United States as well. This requires a coordinated response from across the U.S. government and from other democratic governments to support as well. As Dr. Chima said, since 2014, Freedom House has collected evidence and information on 854 instances of transnational repression. I want to add a big caveat to say that this is physical incidents of transnational repression. So we're talking about assassination attempts, kidnapping, assault, detention, and deportation. Unfortunately, our data set does not cover indirect tactics, which many of you seem to be experiencing. Attacks online, surveillance, spyware, threats over social media and the phone. But we acknowledge that these are taking place. We consider them transnational repression. From our perspective, it's just difficult for our research team to systematically capture all of that, but we recognize it very much, and we are working on policy responses. We have observed 38 governments commit transnational repression. Unfortunately, India is one of those, in 91 countries around the world, and as I said, including the United States. Dr. Chima noted the top 10, what did he say, Hall of Shame. I'm here today to speak about Russia, transnational repression. I lead our Eurasia advocacy at Freedom House. So, as you heard, Russia is in the top 10 Hall of Shame. Between 2014 and 2022, there were 54 incidents that we know of physical transnational repression committed by the Kremlin in 19 countries, including the United States. There were 2 cases in the U.S. that occurred in 2018 and 2017. In these instances, what we saw was Interpol abuse by Russia, where they requested the extradition of 2 dissidents to go back to Russia, but in both instances, the United States did not return these individuals. Am I okay?
You carry on.
Okay, perfect. Just briefly on their tactics. So, as you all know, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the full-scale invasion. Before the full-scale invasion, so up until 2022, I'll briefly note that the Russian transnational repression tactics could be summarized or characterized in 3 ways. First, the Kremlin focused on eliminating former insiders. So these are former members of the Kremlin regime, former government officials.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. The second is that they often employed lethal tactics. They tried to physically assassinate their former critics of the regime. So you've heard of notable cases like Sergei Skripal in the UK or Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned in 2006. A third characteristic of Russian transnational repression before the full-scale invasion was that often many of these campaigns were subnational. So it's not always the national government that's doing this. In the Russian case, it was actually the Republic of Chechnya, which is a region of Russia. The Chechens who have settled in Europe as refugees are extremely vulnerable, and there's been multiple assassination attempts, some successful, against Chechens living abroad. For the sake of time, I'll just briefly, because I know we have a member with us, after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Moscow changed its tactics of transnational repression. The number of incidents skyrocketed. Their collaboration with other authoritarian countries in the region, like Belarus and Central Asian republics, went way up. They're working together to find dissidents and return them to their home countries. And now, not only are they focused focused on targeting political insiders from the regime who have left, but they're broadening their scope to mostly look at anti-war activists, deserters of the Russian military, and journalists living abroad. Despite the severity of this issue, Freedom House has been very, very pleased and honored to see strong bipartisan interest, actually represented by many of the folks here today, in addressing this issue in the United States. And I'll just briefly mention three things. First, we feel that Congress should pass legislation to address gaps in the U.S. response to transnational repression. This includes, most importantly, codifying a definition of transnational repression, ensuring that government officials who may encounter perpetrators or victims of transnational repression receive training necessary to recognize the issue and respond appropriately. And third, we think that sanctions authorities should be strengthened to make it easier to hold perpetrators accountable. The Transnational Repression Policy Act, which was introduced in the House by Congressman Chris Smith and Jim McGovern, and in the Senate by Senators Merkley, Rubio, Cardin, and Hagerty, includes provisions in all three areas, and we recommend its passage. I'll pause there, but happy to take questions. Thank you.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, if you have questions, please write them down, and we will direct them after the conclusion of the program. Our next guest is the Honorable Pete Sessions from Texas, member of the House for 24 years, if I have it correctly.
I'm at 25 now.
25. Always ask. Representing the 32nd District, I believe the city is Waco. And without further ado,
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the panel and each of you taking time to be here today. The discussions that are being developed here are not new ideas, but they're new processes that people are enveloping. And we have learned a long time ago, by the way, is that on? There's not a light on, who cares? It is important for you, the people who are on the front line, whether it be across Asia, across the Balkans, to see these issues as they develop. But we here in America are not immune from these either. The circumstances that happen have come to our doorstep. And so you being here is important. I learned a lot what you have just said. And while much has been said about this being a bipartisan issue, it must continue to be a bipartisan issue. It must continue to be one that civilized people would not only respect and understand, but would want to be active in. So I think, without question, I would say to you today, as being the object of this global problem, we have seen this that has happened for hundreds of years. There are people who have decided to take advantage of others, or those who have found disadvantage or targeting of people. This is repugnant to civilized society. And it is more than a cry for help. It actually is an observation that we all need to be aware of. And I think learning today about its broadness is important for me to know. The legislation is important, but the education is more important. And not just law enforcement organizations, but really a relationship among what might be faith-oriented people too. And we have seen the divide in this country that's happened as a result of faith. People who have faith, people who believe in a higher being, not even agreeing that everybody's entitled to that. And so our world seems to be at a point where we need to make friends with things that are right and call things out that are bad. So what I would say to you is, first of all, thank you for coming to Congress. The Senate appears to be well ahead of us. Is that right?
No, it's bipartisan and bicameral.
All right. the appearances that I have are that the Senate is really far better organized along this effort, and we need to be in the House. Last May or June, we held a briefing, was that June? May or June? Where we got a bipartisan group of people and we stood up and said, you are important. Your visibility in our, not just the political activities, but into the activities of making our country work and making sure that you're a part of those things. And so now we know we've got to move well past that. There are people who will take advantage of every bit of this, and I hearken back to really not knowing, as I was looking at it, what you were describing. And we have to be aware of that. I have friends from around the world, all over the world. I have friends sometimes that get along well and sometimes that do not get along well. But having a common denominator of being for people, civilization, rule of law, is a strong current, and you should believe that the United States wants to be a part of that. And so we applaud you for this. Secondly, for the leaders who are here, and each of you, I think, have stepped forward in some way, please don't back down. There are instances where people do not treat you fairly, do not treat you right, and there's a threat implied and involved in that. And I would say to you, be wise about what you do, but be brave. Work together. Seek out opportunities like this. I think we can pass the legislation. I think we can find places where there are common interests. So from all this, I know Don was just here with you a few minutes ago. He's a dear friend. We can work together, and you've got strong advocates. So it's in the midst of what is a busy day for you and busy day for us, we should all take time to reflect with each other. And I'm proud to be here. Are there any specific questions that you would like to direct to Don? We crossed each other in the hall. Was there any conversation that he had with you that I need to be aware of? Perhaps you would reflect upon that?
Well, we made some recommendations for the legislation to be passed to control transnational repression.
Okay, so he made recommendations to you about how you help us sell that? Okay. Well, Don and I work well with each other. We know each other well, and we respect each other. But the best part is we work well with each other. And I think that he would accuse me of the same. And so, good. Okay. So.
There's a question over here.
Yes.
Written questions.
I want to talk about a very, very different topic relating to the Sikh farmers. Remember 3 years back there was a big farmers agitation in Punjab, mainly driven by Sikh farmers, which against some 3 black laws which Modi has passed without following the parliamentary process. Eventually, after a struggle of 6 months or 9 months, they were withdrawn. And Modi made promises at that time that he will implement certain things, which the main demands was a minimum support price of certain agricultural products which they produce. 3 years passed, he didn't do anything. Yesterday, farmers say they want to go and protest and rally against to remind him what he promised. What he did was, in Punjab and Delhi, there's a shared border. He barricaded all the highways with 4 layers of concrete barriers and spiked fences.
To block people from coming?
To Delhi.
Yeah.
And then when the farmers reached there, he's using live ammunition and tear gas, killing and injuring many. This is happening as we speak.
Yeah.
So I appreciate if the Congress can issue you can issue a tweet or something or could support the farmers that India, you are to follow the democratic process. This is no democracy. PNR is one thing, and this is another on the top.
Yeah. See, it's interesting not just to hear these, but members becoming aware of things. And I think it was that awareness that I have attempted to do now for several years, which I believe becomes power to me about seeing the real problem. And that is why I think I'm encouraging you. I'm showing up here to lend support and ideas, but we do have to pass legislation. And we do have to confront the things which are reality in us. So thank you. Are you through speaking, or did I throw you under the bus?
I'm done.
Could you do me a favor and send those talking points to me?
My pleasure.
Because I think that some of the conversation we have is not always specific like what you've given us. And I am aware of the world problem. I'm not always aware of where things happen and where it came from. For instance, we do know of Russian activity. We are aware of things that have happened with the Chinese. We have seen the Iranians and the North Koreans employ some of these things. And I am not with the CIA. And so I'm not well versed on the story that came back about what happened to people. And it can be a very harrowing experience when you recognize it's on our own soil. When it's on someone else's soil, we tend to want to hear about it and to question and try and make those amends. But it's going on right in front of us, and it will soon could become something that if we don't pay attention to and acknowledge its problem, that it becomes a norm, and it should not. And that's where we need to make sure that we'll stand up. And part of that is welcoming you to our home here today. We are delighted that each of you have chosen to be here in the United States Capitol. So, eagle@petesessions.com.
You got it.
How about that? Good. Thank you very much.
Written questions.
Yes. Can you repeat the two? I'm sorry.
First question. The transnational repression. Second question. How it seeks
Next to you. All right, so the questions that we had submitted in advance, the first one is how to engage with the government of India with respect to these issues. And I believe Dr. Chima has remarks for this.
Sure, well, thank you very much. I have a very interesting information to share with you. As I was speaking here, somebody has sent me a tweet by Hindu American Foundation where they said that I'm related to Pakistani generals. I don't know which general they meant. I was born in Pakistan somehow. I mean, that wasn't my choice. And I left the country about 14 years, and I haven't visited the country for the last 10 years. So I'm apparently related to some general which I don't know. And the second thing, it said that I'm related to Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood. That's a good news to me. I don't know how to react to that, but this is what we are actually talking about. This is what the transnational repression is. This is not first time. When my report came, all this was there, and this very foundation asked for a congressional inquiry that how somebody like me can write this report. They never responded to report, but I think that transnational repression I speak about, I think they have really endorsed what I said today. This is one of the forms of the transnational repression. Now, somebody asked an amazing question that how to work with government of India. I don't know. My colleagues here from the UN tried to work with them. Simona Kursiani, who's the head of Office of Prevention of Genocide, she remembered that few years ago when Mr. Idema Dieng was the Undersecretary General, we were supposed to have our Asia Pacific consultation in India. The then Foreign Minister of India confirmed that we can have that session there, but it was cancelled last minute. And this has happened twice. And this is not only the UN staff, my colleagues from United States Commission on International Religious Freedom who were in attendance, I think she has just left, they have consistently been applying to get visa to get to India to monitor religious freedom situation. And their visas are consistently denied. They are not allowed to enter India. And that's not an XYZ organization. United States Commission on International Religious Freedom is an office established by an act of Congress. They are not allowed, or their commissioners are not allowed. And when we look at this trend of transnational repression, ladies and gentlemen, it's not new. This has been ongoing on Indian soil. There is a level of impunity. In February, the Sikh community commemorate Saka and Kodar, which is extrajudicial killings of 4 Sikh youths 3 decades ago. And the parents, they have been asking for one thing, that you had a judicial inquiry, make that public. But Government of India is not willing to do that. Obviously, issue of the Sikh genocide is there, but I think, I don't know how India would ever pay any attention to it. It's a growing economy. It is one of the very big populous country in the region, but it doesn't take religious freedom and human rights on board. And anybody who try to flag that up would be connected to generals, terrorism, sedition, anti-terror laws, you name it. So the fun starts when you start doing it. At least I don't know how anybody can work with such a pattern. But it's not productive for the people of India, because India is a very multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual country. So religious pluralism should be promoted, not snubbed. Because when religious pluralism is snubbed, and when the freedoms are taken, it's not productive for any country. As the Secretary General has rightly said, that genocidal process starts with the hate speech. You would be surprised to know that about 6 years ago, we had a congressional briefing with the Holocaust Memorial Museum, where Sima would remember that we had Under Secretary General Idema Dieng. At that time, we warned this House and them that there are genocidal trends still continuing in India. I was so glad to see it took 6 years for them to realize it. This week, Holocaust Memorial Museum has issued a statement that the risk of genocide in India is increasing, and they issued a specific report about that. So that's the state of where we stand today.
Thank you, Dr. Chima. The other question that was submitted in advance is for the Undersecretary General, and that is, could you comment on the genocide against the Sikh population within the context of your office's activities and what you see going forward?
Is there a way to get it recognized? So basically what we had asked is the Sikh genocide in 1984 has been recognized by the national legislatures here. How that could be recognized within the UN structure? What is the framework that could be? Yeah.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So within the UN, we recognize genocides. First, we work with the framework, within the framework of the 1948 Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And so that provides the legal framework for international criminal tribunals and international courts. So we have the International Court of Justice that deals with states, and then we have the International Criminal Court that's separate from the UN, but that deals with individual cases. But for instances where the UN recognizes genocides, there has to be a process that's determined by a court of law, that only what has been pronounced as by a court of law as genocide It's the only way that we can recognize whether a genocide happened or not. And not just any court of law, it would have to be an international criminal tribunal. Like we had the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia that pronounced that what happened in Srebrenica was a genocide. We had the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda that pronounced that what happened to the Tutsi was, what happened in Rwanda was a genocide against the Tutsi. And so there are other options, but those other options include like countries themselves prosecuting people for the crime of genocide. And so like we have jurisdictions, like for example, Argentina has prosecuted quite a number of people for genocide. We also have other countries that have taken what we call the protected groups, because the definition of the word genocide is a intent to destroy in whole or in part an ethnical, racial, religious, or national group as such. And there are some countries that have, we call those for the protected groups, the groups that are protected by the Genocide Convention, ethnical, racial, national, religious. And we have countries that have expanded those groups, like for example, Ethiopia added political to those groups and then prosecuted people for the crime of genocide. So what usually happens is that we have cases where clearly whatever has happened has a clear hallmark, like looks clearly like genocide. But if it doesn't fall under those four groups, then it becomes very difficult for a court of law to convict anyone for genocide. So if you look at like what happened in Indonesia in 66, 67, and also Cambodia as well, the decision of the court, like in Cambodia, was that though the intent was genocidal, that the target group was political, because those who are being killed were being killed on the basis of politics, like being defined as communists even when they were not, and sometimes on the basis of class, like in Indonesia. So first to establish whether the Sikh community falls under those four, the protected groups, ethnic, religious, racial, and national, and then to begin working on a process that could end up
in ICC.
Yes, in not just in ICC. Yeah. ICC is one of the processes, because the ICC prosecutor can open a case. Yeah. And also you can have a member state, like another member state, report to the ICJ, for example. Yeah. So like what's going on right now, you've seen
South Africa.
Yes, South Africa and Israel. Yeah. But there was an earlier case which I think is a more clear example, because for Israel and South Africa, the ICJ is dealing with a case that is, it deals with cases between states. Yeah. So now you have Israel and then you have Hamas. Yeah. No.
Yeah, non-state actor.
Yes, so it's a non-state actor. So then it brings that dimension, and I think that's what got us to that point where there wasn't a ceasefire as part of the provisional measures. But if you look at a country like the Gambia took Myanmar to the ICJ. Gambia is a small country. It's actually inside another country. It's inside the Senegal. But they took the country of Myanmar to the International Court of Justice because of what Myanmar had done to the Rohingya Muslims. And so the case that is before the International Court of Justice, for which has we've already received provisional orders, is a case that's brought by a state about a minority in another country. So I would think that the identification of such a state that would then bring that action would be a very good step in terms of beginning ways to get what happened to the Sikh community recognized as a genocide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General. We reached our conclusion at this point, there being no other questions submitted. And so I would like to invite a good friend of the Sikh Caucus Committee, Representative Pat Meehan, served in Congress from 2011 to 2018 from central and eastern Pennsylvania, to give us some concluding remarks. Representative.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Lawrence, for your very, very professional handling of this forum today and the multiple individuals that are coming in and out. I also want to express my appreciation for this distinguished panel, and most importantly, the very thoughtful work they put into not only creating for this discussion, but ultimately the work that they put into the articulation of an understanding of the threat that international repression puts on communities all across the world, and particularly here in the United States. I think if I took something from the comments today, there are themes that have been consistent throughout. Certainly, the beginning is education. It's taking the time to not only understand the nature of the threat, but to articulate it so meaningfully and so well that others who haven't been as aware can, in a very short period of time, begin to appreciate not only the significance but the importance of this recognition. So we begin with the education, to be sure. There is an activism that was discussed, and it is not only the activities like this today, but it is the efforts of this group and others who are making sure across our country and, in fact, across the world, that there is not only an appreciation and understanding of the threat, but a call to action to do the kinds of things that need to be done to assure that there is efforts to try to challenge this issue, and ultimately the recognition that there's a continuity here. And I think about my own time in the Department of Justice, where I first had the opportunity to engage with the Sikh community in the aftermath of September 11th, where there was significant misunderstanding about who Sikh Americans were. And simply because one wore a turban, across the population in general, there was a great deal of animosity being generated towards Sikhs who were simply out in the community because people with so great a misunderstanding saw them as a threat. That was the beginning of a process, and when I came to Congress, I was pleased to be among those at the very outset of the creation of the Sikh Congressional Caucus to allow a voice to be given here to those kinds of issues. And I close my comments on continuity to think about how you have our distinguished co-chairs, and we're thankful for Congressman Valadao and Scanlon, the congressional panelists we had today who are at the top of the Congress, to take the time to speak to us and to invite for us the further communication with them so that they can take an active role in, addressing this issue. And so when this continuity takes us to today, and it is a call to action to suggest that this is not something that will be finished the moment that this seminar is over and we walk out, but a constant challenge and a call to action to assure that we are on the front lines. And there could be no more meaningful way to bring that home than the articulation of the actual threats that have happened from a foreign nation to American citizens here in the United States, which have been which have been demonstrated by the Department of Justice in an indictment. So it's not just something that's being said. And so we are on call. And I thank all of the people who participated today in this very, very important program, but it is just another step in making sure that we continue to not only have the voice heard, but to call for the kind of justice and the stopping of the repression, particularly those who are exercising the fundamental right of religious freedom here in the United States. So thank you for all of the participation, and Lawrence, I'll turn it over to you for the conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the formal portion of our program. We have the room for a bit more time. I'm sure that many of you have conversations you'd like to be having individually, so we invite you to pursue that. And of course, there remains lunch for anyone who has still not had lunch. So thank you all very much.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। TV 84 ਦੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਕ ਤੇ ਸਰੋਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਸ ਵਕਤ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਆ, ਮੈਂ ਅਮਰਵੀਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਆਪ ਸਭ ਦਾ ਤਹਿ ਦਿਲੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਦਾ। ਵੀਰਸ, ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੈਪੀਟਲ ਹਿੱਲ ਵਾਸ਼ਿੰਗਟਨ DC ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖੜੇ ਹਾਂ, ਕੈਪੀਟਲ ਹਿੱਲ ਗਰਾਊਂਡਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਇਸ ਵਕਤ ਰੇਬਰਨ ਬਿਲਡਿੰਗ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ, ਤੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਅੱਜ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਨ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਾਕਸ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਦੀ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਹੀਅਰਿੰਗ ਕਰਵਾਈ ਗਈ ਸੀ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਇਕਤਦਾਰ ਕਰਾਮਤ ਚੀਮਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਸ ਵਕਤ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੌਜੂਦ ਨੇ, ਇਹ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲੀ UK ਤੋਂ ਆਏ ਨੇ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਲਿਆ, ਆਪਣੇ ਰਿਮਾਰਕਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਦਰਜ ਕਰਵਾਏ ਨੇ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੇ ਲਈ, ਤੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਨਾਲ ਫਰੀडम ਹਾਊਸ ਤੇ US ਕੈਪੀਟਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲਾਅ ਮੇਕਰਸ ਬੈਠਦੇ ਆ, ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸ਼ਮੂਲੀਅਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਤੌਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਨੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅੰਡਰ ਸੈਕਟਰੀ ਜਨਰਲ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਵਕਤ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸ਼ਮੂਲੀਅਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਰਸ਼ੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਤੇ ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਭਾਰਤ ਫੋਕਸ ਬਣਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ, ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੈਨੇਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬਿੱਲ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਇਸ ਲਾਅ ਬਣਨ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਸੋ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ। ਬਾਕੀ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਇਕਤਦਾਰ ਕਰਾਮਤ ਚੀਮਾ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਕੋਲੋਂ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਡਾਕਟਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ ਜੀ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ ਜੀ।
ਅਮਰਵੀਰ ਸਿੰਘ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਸੁਣਨ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਤੇ ਦੇਖਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਕ ਤੇ ਸਰੋਤਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਲਾਮ ਅਲੈਕਮ ਤੇ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
ਸਲਾਮ। ਡਾਕਟਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਚਾਹੂੰਗਾ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਵੀ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਸੀ ਅੰਦਰ, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ, ਤੇ ਓਵਰਆਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਐਕਸਪੈਕਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਸੀਗੀ ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਇਸ ਸਾਰੀ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਹਵਾਲੇ ਨਾਲ ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਬਰੀਫ ਕਰ ਦਿਓ ਸਾਡੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਕਾਂ ਦੇ।
ਦੇਖੋ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਸਧਾਰਨ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਸਮਝਾਉਣਾ ਚਾਹਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕੀ ਆ। ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਆਪਣੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੇ ਫਾਰਮਰ ਸਿਟੀਜ਼ਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹਿਊਮਨ ਰਾਈਟ ਐਕਟਿਵਿਸਟ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਰਿਲੀਜੀਅਸ ਫਰੀडम ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਜਾਂ ਮਨੁੱਖੀ ਅਧਿਕਾਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੇ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਂ ਜਰਨਲਿਸਟ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਹੋਰ ਜ਼ਮੀਨ ਤੇ ਜਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਹੋਰ ਮੁਲਕ 'ਚ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨਾ ਬਣਾਵੇ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਤਲ ਕਰਾਵੇ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਅਗਵਾ ਕਰਵਾਵੇ, ਜਾਂ ਔਨਲਾਈਨ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਖਿਲਾਫ ਝੂਠਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਪੇਗੈਂਡਾ ਕਰੇ, ਜਾਂ ਹੈਕਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਸਕੈਂਡਲ ਹੋਣ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਜ਼ਮੀਨਾਂ ਖੋਹ ਲੈਣੀਆਂ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਤੇ ਸੈਡੀਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੇਸ ਆ ਪਾਣੇ, ਇਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਛ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ 'ਚ ਆਉਂਦਾ। ਸੋ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਵੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਗਈ। ਇੱਥੇ ਆਲਰੇਡੀ ਕੰਮ ਰਸ਼ੀਆ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ, ਚਾਈਨਾ 'ਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀਗਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਚਾਈਨਾ ਰਸ਼ੀਆ ਬਾਰੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ US ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲਾਅ ਮੇਕਰ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ। ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਦੀ ਭਾਈ ਨਿੱਜਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਹੋਈ ਆ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ 'ਚ, ਔਰ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਨੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਔਰ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਨੂੰ ਦੋਸ਼ੀ ਠਹਿਰਾਇਆ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਭਾਈ ਨਿੱਜਰ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ BC ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਹੋਈ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ, ਜਾਂ ਭਾਈ ਖੰਡੇ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੌਤ ਦੀ ਜਾਂਚ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ 'ਚ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਮਾਮਲਾ ਹੋਇਆ, ਜਾਂ ਇਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਸੰਗਤ ਦੇ ਕੁਛ ਸਾਬਕ ਜਰਨੈਲ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਹੋਈ ਆ। ਸੋ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਮ 'ਚ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਚੱਲੀ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ। ਇੱਥੇ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਕੁਛ ਮੋਰ ਸੰਸਥਾਵਾਂ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ, ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਕੁਛ ਪੰਥਕ ਪਰਸਨੈਲਿਟੀਜ਼ ਨੇ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਅਮਰਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਵੀ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਨੇ, ਡਾਕਟਰ ਪ੍ਰੀਤਪਾਲ ਸਿੰਘ ਵੀ, ਔਰ ਆਪਣੇ ਪੰਨੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ FBI ਨੇ ਵਾਰਨ ਕੀਤਾ
ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨਾ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ। ਸੋ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਹੁਣ ਤੱਕ ਅਮਰੀਕਨ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਾਕਸ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਸ ਕਾਕਸ ਦਾ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਸਾਜ਼ੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਏ ਕਿ ਭਾਰਤ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹ ਵੱਧਦਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਦੱਬਣ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੋਝੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਰੋਕਣ ਲਈ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਠੱਲ ਪਾਉਣ ਲਈ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਸਾਜ਼ੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਵੇ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਵਾਰੀ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ। ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਤੇ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਉਠਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਰਹੀ ਆ ਜਦੋਂ ਦਾ ਕਾਕਸ ਬਣਿਆ ਉਦੋਂ ਨੂੰ, ਪਰ ਇਸ ਵਾਰੀ ਲਾਅ ਮੇਕਰਸ ਨੂੰ ਇਟ ਇਜ਼ ਵੈਲ ਰਿਸੀਵਡ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਰਸ਼ੀਆ ਔਰ ਚਾਈਨਾ ਫੋਕਸ ਸੀ। ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਪੰਥਕ ਉਪਰਾਲਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਹੁਣ ਭਾਰਤ ਵੀ ਉਸੇ ਲਾਈਨ 'ਚ ਹੀ ਖਲੋਤਾ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਦੇ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਸਾਜ਼ਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਨਾ ਹੀ ਕੰਸਰਨ ਆ। ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕ ਪੁੱਛਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਕਾਂਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗਸ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਜਾਂ ਹੀਅਰਿੰਗਸ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਇੰਪੈਕਟ ਕੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ। ਸੋ ਮੈਂ ਦੱਸਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਇੰਨਾ ਦੇਖੋ ਕਿ ਜਦ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਪੰਥ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਆਗੂਆਂ ਨੇ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਚੁੱਕੀ ਆ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਕਿ ਇੰਡਾਈਟਮੈਂਟ ਵੀ ਹੋਈ ਆ। ਇੱਥੇ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਵਾਰੀ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ 'ਚ ਹੋਇਆ ਕਿ ਕਿਸੇ ਭਾਰਤੀ ਅਧਿਕਾਰੀ ਦੀ ਇੰਡਾਈਟਮੈਂਟ ਹੋਈ ਹੋਵੇ ਜਾਂ ਉਹ 'ਤੇ ਦੋਸ਼ ਲਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ ਹੋਵੇ, ਡਿਪਾਰਟਮੈਂਟ ਆਫ ਜਸਟਿਸ ਨੇ ਬਕਾਇਦਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਚਾਰਜ ਕੀਤਾ। ਫਿਰ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਨਾਲ ਇਹ ਹੋਇਆ ਵਾ ਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਸਿਕਿਉਰਿਟੀ ਐਡਵਾਈਜ਼ਰ ਆ ਇਸ ਮੁਲਕ ਦੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਬਾਈਡਨ ਨੇ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਟੋਰਿਆ ਕਿ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਸ ਬਾਬਤ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਕਿ ਕਿਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਸਿਟੀਜ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਅਮਰੀਕਨ ਸੋਇਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਮਾਰਨ ਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਰੋਕਣ ਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਦਬਾਉਣ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮਨਸੂਬਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਕਾਬਲੇ ਕਬੂਲ ਨਹੀਂ। ਔਰ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਪਰਾਲਾ ਆ ਔਰ ਉਹਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਤੀਜਾ ਨਿਕਲਿਆ ਵਾ ਉਹ ਇਹ ਆ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਕਿ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਬਾਈਡਨ ਨੂੰ ਇਨਵਾਈਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਰਿਪਬਲਿਕ ਡੇ 'ਤੇ ਭਾਰਤ ਦਾ ਦੌਰਾ ਕਰਨ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਆਪਣਾ ਦੌਰਾ ਕੈਂਸਲ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਉਦਮ ਉਪਰਾਲੇ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦੇ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਹਾਊਸਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਉਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਬਿਹਾਈਂਡ ਦਾ ਸੀਨਸ ਅੰਦਰ ਬਹਿ ਕੇ ਕਮਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਰੀਫ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਇਹ ਐਸਾ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਪਬਲਿਕ 'ਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ, ਨਾ ਹੀ ਉਹਦਾ ਰੌਲਾ ਪਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਬੜਾ ਕੱਦੂ 'ਚ ਤੀਰ ਮਾਰਿਆ। ਪਰ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਉਦਮ ਉਪਰਾਲਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੀ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਧ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਮਿਹਰ ਆ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਹੈ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਹਾਊਸਿਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੁਣੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਾਂਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਸੀਗੀ ਉਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਪੈਨਲ ਬਹੁਤ ਤਗੜਾ ਸੀ। UN ਦੀ ਅੰਡਰ ਸੈਕਟਰੀ ਜਨਰਲ ਐਲਿਸ ਦਰੀਤੋ ਜਿਹੜੀ UN ਦੀ ਸੈਕੰਡ ਇਨ ਕਮਾਂਡ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਨਾਲ ਅੰਡਰ ਸੈਕਟਰੀ ਜਨਰਲ ਵੀ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਸੈਕਟਰੀ ਜਨਰਲ ਦੇ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟੇਟਿਵ ਵੀ ਨੇ ਫॉर ਪ੍ਰੀਵੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਆਫ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ ਜਾਂ ਨਸਲਕੁਸ਼ੀ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਰੋਕਥਾਮ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ। ਉਹ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਏ ਸੀ। ਫਰੀडम ਹਾਊਸ ਇੱਥੇ ਦੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡੀ ਸੰਸਥਾ ਵਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਪੂਰੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ 'ਚ ਮੋਨੀਟਰ ਕਰਦੀ ਆ ਔਰ ਰਿਪੋਰਟਾਂ ਵੀ ਛਾਪਦੀ ਆ। ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਪਿੱਛੇ 'ਚ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਾਂਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਹੀਅਰਿੰਗ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਉਹ ਫਰੀडम ਹਾਊਸ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕਰਾਈਆਂ ਗਈਆਂ ਸੀ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੀ ਡਿਪਟੀ ਡਾਇਰੈਕਟਰ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਅੱਜ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਏ ਸੀ KT, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਤਗੜੇ ਔਰ ਸਟੇਜ ਢੰਗ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ। ਔਰ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵਧੀਆ ਗੱਲ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ 'ਚ ਇੰਨੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਕਦੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਹਾਜ਼ਰੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਲਵਾਉਂਦੇ। ਅੱਜ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਮਸਰੂਫ ਦਿਨ ਸੀਗਾ ਹਿਲ 'ਤੇ, ਅੱਜ ਵੋਟਿੰਗ ਡੇ ਸੀ, ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਵੂਮਨ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਿਜ਼ੀ ਸਨ, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਵਜੂਦ ਦੋਵੇਂ ਹੀ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੈਟਸ ਤੇ ਰਿਪਬਲਿਕਨ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਏ ਜਿਸ 'ਚ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਵਿਪ ਨੇ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੈਟਸ ਦੀ ਵਿਪ ਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਦੱਸਦਾ ਜਾਵਾਂ ਕਿ ਵਿਪ ਬੇਸਿਕਲੀ ਇੰਚਾਰਜ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਵਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦਾ ਹਾਊਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਦੇ ਮੈਂਬਰਾਂ ਦਾ। ਸੋ ਕੈਥਲੀਨ ਕਲਾਰਕ ਆਈਆਂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਟੇਜ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਸਿਰਫ ਸਾਰੇ ਅਮਰੀਕੀ ਸ਼ਹਿਰੀ ਬਰਾਬਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਲਕਿ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦਾ ਹਰ ਸ਼ਹਿਰੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਅਧਿਕਾਰ ਬਰਾਬਰ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਉਹਦਾ ਹਿਫਾਜ਼ਤ ਕਰਨੀ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦਾ ਫਰਜ਼ ਬਣਦਾ। ਇਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੀ ਰਿਪਬਲਿਕਨ ਬੜੇ ਸੀਨੀਅਰ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਪੀਟ ਸੈਸ਼ਨ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਏ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਹਾਜ਼ਰੀ ਲਵਾਈ। ਹੋਰ ਮੈਰੀ ਗੇ ਸਕੈਨਲੈਨ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਕਾਕਸ ਦੀ ਕੋ ਚੇਅਰ ਉਹ ਆਈਆਂ। ਫਿਰ ਰਿਪਬਲਿਕਨ ਕੋ ਚੇਅਰ ਡੇਵਿਡ ਵੈਲਾਡੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਨੋਗਰੇਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਔਰ ਹੋਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਟੇਟ ਡਿਪਾਰਟਮੈਂਟ ਟੂ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਸਟੇਟਸ ਕਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਔਨ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਲੀਜੀਅਸ ਫਰੀडम ਦੇ ਆਗੂ ਇੱਥੇ ਪਹੁੰਚੇ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਦਾ ਇਸ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਅਨਾਊਂਸ ਹੋਣ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡਾ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਇਹਦਾ ਆਊਟਕਮ ਆ ਉਹ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਅਨਾਊਂਸ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ ਹੀ ਕੱਲ ਹੁਣ ਟੌਮ ਲੈਂਟਸ ਹਿਊਮਨ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਕਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਜਿਹੜਾ US ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਦਾ ਇੱਥੇ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਦਾ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਤਗੜਾ ਕਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਮਨੁੱਖੀ ਅਧਿਕਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਬਤ, ਉਹ ਕੱਲ ਇੱਕ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਹੀਅਰਿੰਗ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਜਿਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਆਉਣਗੇ ਔਰ ਪ੍ਰੋਪਰ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਤੇ ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮਨੁੱਖੀ ਅਧਿਕਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਸੰਬੰਧੀ ਜੋ ਭਾਰਤ, ਰਸ਼ੀਆ, ਚਾਈਨਾ ਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਮੁਲਕ ਧੱਕਾ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਉਹ 'ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਹੀਅਰਿੰਗ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆ ਕੱਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ।
ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਦੱਸੋਗੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਸੈਨੇਟ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਹੀਅਰਿੰਗ ਕਰਵਾਈ ਗਈ ਸੀਗੀ ਤੇ ਅਦਰਵਾਈਜ਼ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਕਾਕਸ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕਰਵਾਈ ਗਈ ਹੈ ਇਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਕੋਈ ਫਰਕ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਉਸੇ ਲੈਵਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਟੈਕਨੀਕਲ ਟਰਮਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਫਰਕ ਹੈ?
ਦੇਖੋ ਹੀਅਰਿੰਗ ਤੇ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਦਾ ਬੁਨਿਆਦੀ ਇਹ ਫਰਕ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਹੀਅਰਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਸੈੱਟ ਏਜੰਡਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਔਰ ਕੁਝ ਸਵਾਲ ਜਵਾਬ ਕੀਤੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਖੇਤਰ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਨਿਕਲ ਸਕਦੇ, ਐਕਸਪਰਟ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਸੀਮਤ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ। ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਦਾ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਫਿਰ ਹੀਅਰਿੰਗਸ 'ਚ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਹੀਅਰਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਦੀ ਹੀਅਰਿੰਗ ਹੋਵੇ ਜਾਂ ਕਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਸਿਰਫ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਸ ਕਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਆ ਉਹ ਹੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾਤਰ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਆ ਔਰ ਉਹੀ ਸਵਾਲ ਜਵਾਬ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਪਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਆ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੀ ਦੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਮੈਂਬਰਸ ਆਫ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਹੈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਫਿਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਜਾਂ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਇੱਥੇ ਸ਼ਮੂਲੀਅਤ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਪਰਸਨਲੀ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਪਰ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੇ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਮਟੀਰੀਅਲ ਇਨਵੀਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਉੱਥੇ ਕੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਹੋਈ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਰਾਹੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ। ਉਹਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਫਾਈਂਡਿੰਗਸ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚਾਈਆਂ ਜਾਂਦੀਆਂ ਔਰ ਉਹ ਨਾਮ ਹੀ ਆਏ ਹੁਣ ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਚੀਫ ਆਫ ਸਟਾਫ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਟਿਵ ਡਾਇਰੈਕਟਰ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਆਫਿਸ ਦੇ ਅਧਿਕਾਰੀ ਸਾਰੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕ ਨੋਟਸ ਲੈ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ, ਸਮਰੀਆਂ ਬਣਾ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਟ ਅਪ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੀ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਵਟਾਂਦਰਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੀਆਂ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਇੰਪਲੀਕੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਕੀ ਨੇ।
ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਹੁਣ ਜੇ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਆਪਾਂ ਜੀਓਪੋਲਿਟਿਕਸ ਵੱਲ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਮਾਰਦੇ ਆ, ਮਤਲਬ ਜਿਸ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਨਾਲ ਹੁਣ ਰਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਇਨਵੋਏ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਬਿਆਨ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦਬਾਅ ਬਣਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਆ ਭਾਰਤ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕਿ ਰਸ਼ੀਆ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਭਾਰਤ ਦੇ ਸਬੰਧ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੋੜਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦੀ ਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਮਤਲਬ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਵਕਤ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਖਲੋਤਾ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹੋ? ਇੱਕ ਪਾਸੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਵੈਸਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਟਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਭਾਰਤ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਰਜੀਮ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਅਥੋਰੀਟੇਰੀਅਨ ਰਜੀਮ ਦੇ ਵੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਵੱਧ ਰਿਹਾ ਆ। ਸੋ ਮਤਲਬ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬੈਲੈਂਸ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਵੈਸਟ ਦੇ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਕੁ ਫੇਵਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਇਵੈਂਚੁਅਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਿੱਧਰ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ?
ਦੇਖੋ ਜੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਹਿੱਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਪਿਛਲੇ 8-10 ਸਾਲ ਤੋਂ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਮਿਹਨਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਆਏ ਆ। ਭਾਰਤ ਦੇ ਤੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਬੜੇ ਚੰਗੇ ਸੰਬੰਧ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਔਰ ਇੱਥੇ ਭਾਰਤ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਸੁਣਨ ਨੂੰ ਤਿਆਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ। ਪਰ ਹੁਣ ਵੈਸਟ ਦਾ ਮੂਡ ਬਦਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਨਰਿੰਦਰ ਮੋਦੀ ਨੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਔਰ ਯੂਰਪ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਧੋਖਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਭਾਰਤ ਉੱਤੇ ਇਨਵੈਸਟਮੈਂਟ ਕੀਤੀ। ਭਾਰਤ 'ਚ ਮਨੁੱਖੀ ਅਧਿਕਾਰਾਂ ਦਾ ਇੰਨਾ ਘਾਣ ਹੋਇਆ, ਧਾਰਮਿਕ ਆਜ਼ਾਦੀਆਂ ਦੀ ਇੰਨੀ ਲੰਘਣਾ ਹੋਈ, ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਚੁੱਪ ਸਾਧ ਕੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਰਹੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਕਮਰਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਸੀ। ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਮੋਦੀ ਨੇ ਬਲੈਂਕ ਚੈੱਕ ਦੇ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਵਰਤ ਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਪਾਸੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਯਾਰੀ ਗੰਢੀ ਤੇ ਦੂਸਰੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਰਸ਼ੀਆ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਰਲ ਕੇ ਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਮੁਲਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਰਲ ਕੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇੱਕ ਬ੍ਰਿਕਸ ਗਰੁੱਪ ਬਣਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਔਰ ਡਾਲਰ ਦੇ ਮੁਕਾਬਲੇ ਇੱਕ ਇਕੁਅਲ ਕਰੰਸੀ ਲਿਆਉਣ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਉਹ ਕੰਸਰਨ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਇਸ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਗਲਿਆਰਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਤਗੜੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਸੁਣੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਮੌਕੇ 'ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਸੰਗਤ ਨੂੰ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਕਰਾਂਗਾ ਕਿ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੌਕੇ ਬਾਰ-ਬਾਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦੇ। ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਬੜਕਾ ਮਾਰਨ ਨਾਲ ਤੇ ਜਜ਼ਬਾਤੀ ਭੜਕਾਊ ਸਟੇਟਮੈਂਟਾਂ ਦੇਣ ਦੀ ਬਜਾਏ ਇੱਥੇ ਲੌਬਿੰਗ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ। ਸੁਚੱਜੇ ਢੰਗ ਨਾਲ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਵੂਮਨ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਟੇਟ ਡਿਪਾਰਟਮੈਂਟ ਜਾਂ ਕਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਸੈਨੇਟਰਸ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸੁਚੱਜੇ ਢੰਗ ਨਾਲ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਮ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਦਾ ਸਮਝਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੌਕੇ ਬਾਰ-ਬਾਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦੇ। 47 'ਚ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਜ਼ਬਾਤੀ ਤਕਰੀਰਾਂ, ਭੜਕਾਊ ਬਿਆਨ ਦੇ ਕੇ, ਨਾਅਰੇ ਲਾ ਕੇ ਮੌਕਾ ਗਵਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸੀ। ਹੁਣ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮੌਕਾ ਮਿਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਬੜੇ ਸੁਚੱਜੇ ਢੰਗ ਨਾਲ ਇੱਥੇ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਮੇਕਰਸ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੀ ਗੱਲ ਸਮਝਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਭਾਰਤ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੈਸਟ ਦਾ, ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦਾ ਮੂਡ ਬਦਲ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ।
ਜੀ ਨਹੀਂ, ਉਹ ਗੱਲ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਵਕਤ ਲੱਗ ਰਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਤੀ ਇੱਕ ਵੱਡਾ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਮਾਰਕ ਲੱਗਾ ਵੈਸਟ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਮੇਕਿੰਗ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਹਵਾਲੇ ਨਾਲ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਯੂਨੀਕ ਜੀ ਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੈ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਉਹ ਵੈਸਟ ਦੇ ਵੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਝੁਕਾਅ ਰੱਖਦਾ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਉਹ ਵਾਪਸ ਰਸ਼ੀਆ ਵੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਝੁਕ ਸਕਦਾ। ਇਹਦੀ ਕੀ ਪੋਸੀਬਿਲਿਟੀ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਐਂਡ ਐਟ ਦ ਸੇਮ ਟਾਈਮ ਜੇ ਉਸ ਕਿਸਮ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਬਣਦੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਵੈਸਟ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਇੰਪਲੀਕੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਹੋਣਗੀਆਂ ਉਹਦੀਆਂ?
ਦੇਖੋ ਜੀ, ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਯੂਨੀਕ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ, ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਖਤਰਨਾਕ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਭਾਰਤ ਲਈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਭਾਰਤ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਦੋਵਾਂ ਥਾਲੀਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਖਾਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਨਰਿੰਦਰ ਮੋਦੀ ਨੇ ਫੋਰਨ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਨੂੰ ਠੀਕ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਲਾਇਆ। ਨਰਿੰਦਰ ਮੋਦੀ ਔਰ ਮਨਮੋਹਨ ਸਿੰਘ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਿਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਇੰਨੀ ਵਿਦਵਤਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਸੁਚੱਜੇ ਢੰਗ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣੇ ਮੁਲਕ ਦੀ ਫੋਰਨ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਚਲਾਉਂਦਾ। ਸੋ ਭਾਰਤ ਉਸ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਖੜਾ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ। ਜੇ ਭਾਰਤ ਨੇ ਸਰਵਾਈਵ ਕਰਨਾ ਤੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਨੁੱਖੀ ਅਧਿਕਾਰ ਦੇਣੇ ਪੈਣਗੇ ਔਰ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਜਿਹਦੀ ਬੇਸ ਫੈਡਰਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਤੇ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਮਾਡਲ ਉੱਥੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਖਤਮ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਹੁਣ ਹਿੰਦੂ ਰਾਸ਼ਟਰ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਇੰਡੀਆ ਜਿਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਫਰ ਆਫ ਪਾਵਰ ਹੋਈ, ਮੈਂ ਆਜ਼ਾਦੀ ਤਾਂ ਮੰਨਦਾ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ 47 'ਚ, ਤੇ ਉਹ ਇਹੀ ਮਾਡਲ ਸੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦਾ ਮਾਡਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਖੇਤਰ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸੂਬੇ ਨੇ, ਪ੍ਰੋਵਿੰਸਿਸ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਲੋਕ ਨੇ, ਕੌਮਾਂ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੱਧ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਧ ਆਜ਼ਾਦੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਖੇਤਰੀ ਅਧਿਕਾਰ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਜਾਣ, ਉਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਖੋਲੇ ਗਏ ਨੇ। ਸੋ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਭਾਰਤ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਦੋ ਹੀ ਆਪਸ਼ਨ ਨੇ, ਜਾਂ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਰੀਅਲ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੇਸੀ ਬਣ ਕੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਵੇ, ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਅਧਿਕਾਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੇ, ਆਟੋਨਮੀ ਦੇ, ਰਾਈਟ ਟੂ ਸੈਲਫ ਡਿਟਰਮੀਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ। ਜੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦਾ ਟੁੱਟਣਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਇਜ਼ ਅ ਰਾਈਟਿੰਗ ਔਨ ਦਾ ਵਾਲ।
ਜੀ ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਹੁਣ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਨਵੈਸਟੀਗੇਸ਼ਨ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਉਮੀਦ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਇਨਵੈਸਟੀਗੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੱਥ ਨੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਉਣਗੇ, ਜਾਂ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਇੰਡਾਈਟਮੈਂਟ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ 'ਚ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਲੈਵਲ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਇਨਵੈਸਟੀਗੇਸ਼ਨ ਪਬਲਿਕਲੀ ਡਿਕਲੇਅਰ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਊਗੀ, ਪਰ ਉਹ ਹਜੇ ਤੱਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਇਆ। ਤੇ ਵੈਸਟ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਕਿਤੇ ਨਾ ਕਿਤੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਬੈਲੈਂਸ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਤੇ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਕੁ ਸੀਰੀਅਸ ਲੱਗਦੇ ਆ ਭਾਰਤ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਤੀ ਇਸ ਵਕਤ, ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਹਵਾਲੇ ਨਾਲ?
ਦੇਖੋ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕ੍ਰਿਮੀਨਲ ਜਸਟਿਸ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਆ, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਈ ਵਾਰ ਕਨਫਿਊਜ਼ ਕਰ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਭਾਰਤ, ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਜਾਂ ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਆਏ ਆ, ਕਿ ਉੱਥੇ ਕੋਈ ਕਤਲ ਹੋਇਆ ਜਾਂ ਕੁਛ ਹੋਇਆ, ਉਹਦੀ ਇਨਵੈਸਟੀਗੇਸ਼ਨ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਇੱਕ ਉਹਦਾ ਸਟੈਪ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅਖਬਾਰਾਂ 'ਚ ਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ। ਪਰ ਵੈਸਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਕ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਨੂੰ ਇਨਵੈਸਟੀਗੇਟ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਬੜਾ ਸੋਫਿਸਟੀਕੇਟ ਤਰੀਕਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ। ਉਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਦੇਰ ਮੁਕੰਮਲ ਸਬੂਤ ਹਰ ਸ਼ੈ ਨਾ ਮਿਲ ਜਾਏ ਉਨੀ ਦੇਰ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ। ਸੋ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਆਸ ਰੱਖਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹ ਇਨਕੁਆਇਰੀਆਂ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਜਾਂ ਇੰਡਾਈਟਮੈਂਟ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਈ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ 'ਚ, ਉਹਦਾ ਇਹ ਮਕਸਦ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਵੀ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਪੋਚਾ ਫੇਰ ਦੇਣਾ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਛੁਪਾ ਦੇਣਾ। ਯਕੀਨੀ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਨੇ ਏਡੀ ਵੱਡੀ ਗੱਲ ਆਪਣੇ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ 'ਚ ਖੜੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਕਹੀ ਆ, ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਇਸ ਲੈਵਲ 'ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਲੈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਸਟੈਪ ਬੈਕ ਹੋਣਾ ਔਖਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ। ਫਿਰ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਕ੍ਰੈਡੀਬਿਲਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਕੋਈ ਭਾਰਤ ਦੀ ਜਾਂ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਐਵੇਂ ਕੋਈ ਖੜਾ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ। ਔਰ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਨੇ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ 'ਚ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਖੜੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਭਾਰਤ 'ਤੇ ਇਲਜ਼ਾਮ ਲਾਇਆ। ਜੇ ਹੁਣ ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਸੀਰੀਅਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੈਂਦੀ ਤਾਂ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਦੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਕ੍ਰੈਡੀਬਿਲਿਟੀ 'ਤੇ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਮਾਰਕ ਆਏਗਾ। ਔਰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਸ਼ੀਅਨਸ ਦੀ ਕ੍ਰੈਡੀਬਿਲਿਟੀ 'ਤੇ ਜਾਂ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਜਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਹੋਰ ਮੰਤਰੀ ਦੀ ਕ੍ਰੈਡੀਬਿਲਿਟੀ 'ਤੇ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਮਾਰਕ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਏ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਉਹਦੇ 'ਤੇ ਬਰਕਰਾਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਹਿ ਸਕਦਾ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਰਿਜ਼ਾਈਨ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ। ਸੋ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਆਸ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ, ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੋਵੇਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੀਰੀਅਸ ਲੈ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਪਰ ਇਹਦੀ ਇਨਵੈਸਟੀਗੇਸ਼ਨ 'ਚ ਟਾਈਮ ਲੱਗਣਾ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਕਰਨ 'ਚ ਹਜੇ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਹੋਰ ਮਜ਼ੀਦ ਇਨਵੈਸਟੀਗੇਸ਼ਨ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੋਵੇ।
ਜੀ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਆਪਣਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਦੇਣ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਵਿਚਾਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਾਂਝ ਪਾਈ।
ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਪ੍ਰਿਤਪਾਲ ਸਿੰਘ, ਕੋਆਰਡੀਨੇਟਰ, ਅਮਰੀਕਨ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਾਕਸ ਕਮੇਟੀ। ਅੱਜ 14 ਫਰਵਰੀ ਨੂੰ 12 ਤੋਂ 4 ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਦੀ ਰੇਬਰਨ ਬਿਲਡਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਾਕਸ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਅਤੇ ਕੰਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਕਾਕਸ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਰੱਖੀ ਗਈ ਸੀ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੋਸਟ ਪਾਵਰਫੁਲ ਪੈਨਲ ਜਿਹੜਾ UN ਦੇ ਅੰਡਰ ਸੈਕਟਰੀ ਜਨਰਲ ਤੇ ਫਰੀडम ਹਾਊਸ ਤੋਂ ਡਿਪਟੀ ਡਾਇਰੈਕਟਰ ਐਡਵੋਕੇਸੀ ਅਤੇ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਚੀਮਾ, ਇਹ ਤਿੰਨੇ ਜਣੇ ਹਾਜ਼ਰ ਸੀ ਅਤੇ ਸਕੋਰ ਆਫ ਅਦਰ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਉਹ ਹਾਜ਼ਰ ਹੋਏ। ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਸੀ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਤੋਂ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਤੀ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਭਾਵੇਂ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਵੈਂਟ ਸੀਗੀ ਇਹ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ 'ਤੇ ਸੀ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਸ਼ੀਆ, ਚਾਈਨਾ ਅਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਕੰਟਰੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਕਵਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ, ਪਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੋਸਟ ਫੋਕਸ ਸੀਗਾ ਉਹ ਇੰਡੀਆ 'ਤੇ ਸੀਗਾ। ਅਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਨੇ, ਦੋਨੇ ਕੋ ਚੇਅਰ ਡੇਵਿਡ ਵੈਲਾਡਿਓ, ਮੈਰੀ ਗੇ ਸਕੈਨਲੋਨ, ਪੀਟ ਸੈਸ਼ਨਸ ਅਤੇ ਮੋਸਟ ਪਾਵਰਫੁਲ ਲੇਡੀ ਇਨ ਦਾ ਹਾਊਸ, ਸ਼ੀ ਇਜ਼ ਨੰਬਰ 2 ਇਨ ਦਾ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ, ਕੈਥਰੀਨ ਕਲਾਰਕ, ਸ਼ੀ ਇਜ਼ whip in the house also, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਹੋਏ। ਔਰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਜੋ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਤੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਆ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ 6 ਫਾਰ ਜਸਟਿਸ ਦੇ ਗੁਰਪਤਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਪੰਨੂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਤੇ ਹਮਲੇ ਦੀ ਸਾਜ਼ਿਸ਼, ਭਾਈ ਹਰਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਨਿੱਜਰ, ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਤੇ ਕਾਤਲਾਨਾ ਜੋ ਹਮਲਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ। ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੁਛ ਚੋਣਵੇਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਐਕਟਿਵਿਸਟ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨੇ 'ਤੇ ਲਿਆ ਕੇ ਜੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਵਾਰਦਾਤ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਇਹ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ। ਔਰ FBI ਵੱਲੋਂ ਡਿਊਟੀ ਟੂ ਵਾਰਨ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਰਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਐਕਟਿਵਿਸਟ ਨੂੰ। ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਬੜੀ ਖੁੱਲ੍ਹ ਕੇ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਈ ਔਰ ਸਾਰੇ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨਾਂ ਨੇ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿ ਪੈਨਲਿਸਟ ਨੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਡਿਟੇਲ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ TNR ਦਾ ਕੀ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਹੈ, ਕੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ, ਉਹਦੇ ਰਿਜ਼ਲਟ ਕੀ ਹੋਣਗੇ। ਉੱਥੇ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਆਵਾਜ਼ 'ਚ ਗੱਲ ਕਹੀ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਅਜਿਹੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਾਰਵਾਈ ਹੈ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਮੁਲਕ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਨਾ ਬਰਦਾਸ਼ਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ, ਨਾ ਹੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਔਰ ਨਾ ਹੀ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਐਕਸਪੈਕਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਵੱਧ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਰਿਜ਼ਲਟ ਸੀਗਾ। ਬਹੁਤ ਅੱਛਾ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਵੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਟਾਫਰਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਤੇ ਸਟੇਟ ਡਿਪਾਰਟਮੈਂਟ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਕੁਝ ਲੋਕ ਆਏ ਹੋਏ ਸੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਗਏ ਨੇ। ਸਾਸੀ ਬੜਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਅੱਛਾ ਸਹਿਯੋਗ ਰਿਹਾ ਔਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਕਾਮਯਾਬ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਰਹੀ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਅੱਜ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਸਕਸੈਸਫੁਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਆ ਉਹ ਕੰਡਕਟ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੈਪੀਟਲ ਹਿੱਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹਿਊਮਨ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਆਰਗੇਨਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਫਰੀडम ਹਾਊਸ, ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ UN ਅੰਡਰ ਸੈਕਟਰੀ ਔਰ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਕਾਂਗਰਸਮੈਨ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਏਰੀਆਜ਼ ਤੋਂ ਆ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਆ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਆਪਣੀ ਚਿੰਤਾ ਜ਼ਾਹਰ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ। ਇਹ ਇੱਕ ਕੰਟੀਨਿਊਸ ਐਫਰਟ ਆ ਸਿੱਖ ਅਮਰੀਕਨ ਕਾਕਸ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੌਮ ਆ, ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਮ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕਿ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਹਮਲੇ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਆ, ਉਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਅਵੇਅਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਆ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਅਪਡੇਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਆ। ਬਹੁਤ ਵਾਰੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਅਜ਼ਿਊਮ ਕਰ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਖਬਰਾਂ ਨਿਊਜ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਇੰਡਾਈਟਮੈਂਟਸ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਨੇ, ਫਿਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਐਕਟਿਵਿਸਟ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਟਾਰਗੇਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਵਰਲਡ ਵਾਈਡ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਸਿੱਖ ਹੋਮਲੈਂਡ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਈਅਰਸ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਆਈਜ਼ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੌਮ 'ਤੇ ਰਹਿਣ, ਔਰ ਸਾਡਾ ਇਹ ਫਰਜ਼ ਬਣਦਾ ਆ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕੌਮ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਪਲਾਈਟ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਤੱਕ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਡਿਸੀਜ਼ਨ ਮੇਕਰ ਨੇ, ਲਾਅ ਮੇਕਰਸ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚਾਈਏ। ਔਰ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਅੱਜ ਵਾਲੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਰੀਫਿੰਗ ਸੀ, ਇਟਸ ਐਨ ਐਫਰਟ। ਇਹ ਇੱਕ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਆ ਇੱਕ ਕੰਟੀਨਿਊਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਆ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਇਹ ਹਾਲਾਤਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਜਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੌਮ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਆ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਦੇ ਲਾਅ ਮੇਕਰਸ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਪਡੇਟ ਕਰਾਉਂਦੇ ਰਹਿਣਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਆ। ਔਰ ਉਹਦੀ ਕੜੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਇਹ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਸੀਗਾ ਇਹ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਕਿਸਮ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਆ ਉਹ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਰਹਾਂਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੇਫਟੀ ਐਂਡ ਸਿਕਿਉਰਿਟੀ ਆ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੀ, ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਵੈਸਟਰਨ ਵਰਲਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਉਹ ਬਰਕਰਾਰ ਰਹੇ। ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਡਾ ਰਾਈਟ ਟੂ ਫਰੀ ਸਪੀਚ ਆ ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਫਰੀडम ਆਫ ਸਪੀਚ ਆ ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਫਰੀडम ਆਫ ਐਕਸਪ੍ਰੈਸ਼ਨ ਆ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਕਿ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੈਂਟ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਬਾਹਰਲੇ ਦੇਸ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਰਾਈਟ ਆ ਉਹ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਣ ਸਕਣ, ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੀਆਂ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀਆਂ ਇਸ ਪਾਸੇ ਲਾਈਆਂ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਘਰ-ਬਾਰ ਛੱਡੇ ਨੇ। ਔਰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਉਮੀਦ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਇਹ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਸਟੇਟ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਉੱਤੇ ਹਮਲੇ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਆ, ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਮਿਲੇਗਾ। ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸੱਚ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਖੜੂਗੀ। ਗੱਲ ਐਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੱਚ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਝੂਠ ਦੀ ਹੋਈ ਆ ਔਰ ਸੱਚ ਤੇ ਮਕਾਰ ਦੀ ਆ। ਸੋ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਵੈਸਟਰਨ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੇਸੀਜ਼ ਨੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹ ਮੋਰਲ ਇੰਪਾਸ ਆ ਉਹ ਅਜੇ ਕਾਇਮ ਆ। ਸੋ ਉਹ ਆਈ ਹੋਪ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਸ ਕਿਸਮ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੋਰ ਇਵੈਂਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੰਟੀਨਿਊ ਰੱਖਾਂਗੇ ਜੀ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।